Mark was a tech junkie, always on the lookout for the newest gadgets. His latest obsession was a sleek, high-end smartphone he had just ordered from an obscure online retailer. It wasn't even available in mainstream stores yet, which made him feel like he was ahead of the curve. The box arrived a few days later unmarked, plain, almost too plain for such an expensive purchase. But Mark didn't care. He tore into it like a kid on Christmas morning. The phone was impressive, to say the least. Its ultra-thin design and futuristic interface felt like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. But there was one feature that stood out to him immediately: a pre-installed app. The icon was just a dark, swirling vortex. No name, no description, no information about its function. When he tapped it, nothing happened. Not a single thing. Weird, Mark muttered. He was tech-savvy enough to know not to mess with strange apps, especially ones he didn't install, but this one intrigued him. Why would a brand new phone come with something like that? He tried to delete it, but there was no option to remove it. Annoyed but curious, he left it alone and focused on customizing the rest of the phone to his liking. That night, as he was getting ready for bed, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. One buzz, then two, then three. Rapid, insistent, like it was demanding his attention. Mark grabbed it, expecting a string of messages or notifications, but the screen only showed one thing. The Vortex app had opened itself. Now it was spinning slowly, an inky black swirl that seemed to deepen the more he looked at it. A single line of text blinked below it. "Do you want to see?" Mark blinked, confused. See what? He didn't remember opening the app, and the question made no sense. He tried to close it, but the phone froze. Nothing responded except the swirling vortex and the question, "Do you want to see?" Irritated, Mark powered the phone off and threw it back onto the nightstand. "Glitchy piece of junk," he muttered, turning over and trying to get some sleep. But the buzzing didn't stop. Even though the phone was off, it vibrated. It was faint at first, just a soft hum. But it grew louder, more insistent, until it was rattling the whole nightstand. Annoyed, Mark snatched the phone and hit the power button. The screen flickered back on, the swirling vortex staring back at him. And the question, again. "Do you want to see?" Mark's skin prickled. The buzzing seemed to synchronize with his pulse, making him feel uneasy. His finger hovered over the screen, and before he could stop himself, he tapped yes. The vortex stopped spinning. Then the phone screen went pitch black. Just as Mark was about to toss the phone again, the blackness shifted. Slowly, a shape started to appear on the screen, blurry at first, then sharper. It was a photo of his apartment. His living room, to be exact, taken from an angle near the ceiling, like a security camera shot. The thing was, Mark didn't have security camera. His heart began to race. How did the phone have this image? Was it accessing his Wi-Fi? His other devices? His paranoia spiked, and he scrambled through the phone's settings, looking for a connection, a source. But there was nothing. The phone wasn't connected to any network. Suddenly, another photo appeared. This time it was of his kitchen, darker, like it had been taken just a few minutes ago. He could see his keys on the counter, the leftover pizza on the table. Then another, his hallway, his bedroom door. His breath hitched. The photos were getting closer. His bedroom door creaked open slightly, and the next photo showed his room, him in his bed, looking at his phone. He felt his blood run cold. That image had been taken right now. Mark threw the phone down, heart pounding in his chest. He stared at his bedroom door, then at the phone, which sat innocently on the floor. Then it buzzed again. The photo changed. This time it was a dark, blurry shape right behind him in bed. Standing inches away from his back, he could see the outline of a figure, tall, shadowy, but with no distinguishable features. Mark bolted up from his bed and spun around. The room was empty. There was no one there. Just silence, oppressive and heavy, as if the air itself was watching him. The phone buzzed again. "Do you want to see?" His hand shook as he picked it up. The figure was closer now, just beside where he had been sitting seconds ago. The app was showing something in his room, something he couldn't see, but the phone could. Mark's instinct screamed at him to leave, to get out of the apartment. He grabbed his keys, his wallet, and raced to the front door, ready to flee. But just as he reached for the handle, the phone buzzed again. This time the image was of the front door, his front door, and there on the screen was the shadow waiting for him on the other side. Mark froze, the phone clutched in his hand. He turned slowly, staring at the door, his breath quick and shallow. There was no sound, no sign of anything outside. But the phone buzzed again, faster now, the vibration more urgent. The next image was of the door's handle. It was turning. He backed away, dropping the phone in his panic. The buzzing stopped. The apartment was eerily quiet. He stood there breathless, waiting for the door to creak open. But nothing happened. For a moment he almost convinced himself it was all in his head, a hallucination brought on by stress or fatigue. Then the phone buzzed one last time. Mark didn't pick it up. He didn't want to, but he had to. He reached down, hands trembling, and turned the screen towards him. The app had updated again, only now the vortex was gone. It was just a black screen with two words. Too late. Before he could react, the lights in the apartment flickered out. The room plunged into darkness, and Mark heard it, the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. And this time they weren't in the phone. The old phone booth stood like a sentinel at the edge of Willow Lane, its red paint peeling and glass panels clouded with age. Most of Millhaven had forgotten it was even there, a relic from a time before cell phones and internet. But Annie Fletcher knew. She knew all too well. It started on a rainy Tuesday night. Annie was walking home from her late shift at the diner when her phone died. Cursing under her breath, she spotted the booth and ducked inside, fishing for change to call her roommate for a ride. The moment she lifted the receiver, a chill ran down her spine. Instead of a dial tone, she heard breathing. Heavy, ragged breathing, punctuated by a wet, gurgling sound. "Hello?" Annie whispered, her hand trembling. The breathing stopped. Then a voice, low, guttural, and unmistakably inhuman rasp. "I've been waiting for you, Annie." She slammed the phone down, her heart pounding. It was just some creep playing a prank, she told herself. But as she turned to leave, she froze. Written on the glass in what looked horribly like fresh blood were the words, "Don't hang up." Annie ran home that night, convinced she was losing her mind. But over the next week, things only got worse. Her phone would ring with no caller ID, and when she answered, she'd hear that same ragged breathing. At work, at home, in the middle of the night, it never stopped. People started to vanish from Millhaven. First, old Mr. Jenkins from down the street. Then Sarah, a regular at the diner. Each time Annie would receive a call, and that guttural voice would describe in graphic detail what it had done to them. The police were useless. They found no evidence, no leads. Annie stopped sleeping, stopped eating. The voice haunted her every waking moment. It knew things about her past, things no one could possibly know. Finally, driven to the brink of madness, Annie returned to the phone booth. As she approached, the phone began to ring. With a shaking hand, she picked up the receiver. "What do you want from me?" she sobbed. The voice chuckled, a sound like bones grinding together. "Why, Annie, I want you to join us. We're all waiting for you here. Your parents, your little brother Tommy, don't you want to see them again?" Annie's blood ran cold. Her family had died in a car crash years ago. How could it know? "You're not real," she whispered. "This isn't real." "Oh, but I am," the voice growled. "And I'm coming for you, Annie. I'm almost there." The line went dead. Annie dropped the receiver and turned to flee, but she found herself face to face with a figure straight out of a nightmare. Rotting flesh hung from exposed bone, and its mouth was filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. Annie's scream was cut short as the creature lunged. The phone booth's door slammed shut, muffling the sounds of tearing flesh and snapping bones. The next morning, the people of Millhaven awoke to find the old phone booth gone, as if it had never existed, and Annie Fletcher was never seen again. But sometimes on quiet nights, people walking down Willow Lane swear they can hear a phone ringing in the distance. Those who've dared to answer have never been heard from again. Remember, if you're ever in Millhaven and you hear a phone ringing, whatever you do, don't pick up. Some calls are best left unanswered. Milo downloaded the new social media app, FeedMe, on a whim. It was supposed to be the next big thing, promising to satisfy your deepest cravings for connection. The first night, he dreamed of scrolling through an endless feed. He woke up exhausted, his fingers sore as if he'd been swiping all night. His phone's battery was mysteriously drained. Over the next few days, Milo became obsessed with FeedMe. He posted constantly, chasing likes and followers. But something felt off. His photos seemed to change slightly after uploading. Shadows deeper, his smile a bit too wide. A week in, Milo noticed his fingertips were raw and bleeding. He didn't remember scratching them. When he touched his phone's screen, it felt warm and pulsing. His friends started to worry. "You look sick," they said. Milo caught his reflection in a window. His skin was pale, eyes sunken. Had he lost weight? That night, unable to sleep, Milo opened FeedMe. A new message popped up. "Feed me more." The words seemed to writhe on the screen. Suddenly, his phone vibrated violently. The screen cracked, and something wet and red seeped out. Milo tried to drop the phone, but it stuck to his hands. He felt a sharp pain as tendrils burst from the screen, burrowing into his fingertips. Milo screamed as the tendrils crawled up his arms, pulsing and growing. His vision blurred. The last thing he saw was his own face on the cracked screen, distorted and grinning. The next morning, Milo's roommate found his empty bed. On the nightstand sat Milo's phone, the FeedMe app open. A new post showed Milo's smiling face with the caption, "Thanks for the meal. Who's next?" The phone's camera blinked, focusing on the roommate. A notification chimed. New follower acquired. In the weeks that followed, more people vanished, leaving behind only phones with the FeedMe app running. Those who tried to delete the app found it impossible. And at night, in the dark, their phones would glow, screens displaying an ever-growing, ever-hungry feed of familiar faces, silent screams frozen in eternal post. The next time your phone chimes with a new notification, be careful what you feed it. Some appetites can never be satisfied, and in the digital age, you might just become part of the feed.